I guess when you become an elected official, you sign away and waive all of your constitutional rights, especially the rights enumerated in the Fourth and the Fifth Amendments. Or so it would seem given the developments that happened in Federal Apprentice this very week. In response to a congressional subpoena that was given down this past week by a federal judge, Wells Fargo and TD Bank have turned over thousands of documents pertaining to the president and his activities over the past 10 years. And other banks like Capital One and Deutsche Bank have been permitted to do the same thing, but they haven't yet. However, they are expected to. This goes in addition to the fact that Democrats have an open subpoena for the Donald's tax records, and the executive branch is indicating that they have no intention to go forward and respond to this subpoena. Now, a congressional subpoena is a little bit different from a subpoena that you would get from your local municipal or county court. And Congress is a little bit limited in its ability to use the subpoena, but in the same vein, the subpoena does have the power to sidestep the Constitution, especially the Fourth and the Fifth Amendments, but only slightly. Congress is not a law enforcement agency, so under normal circumstances, it would not have the power to issue a subpoena at all. That power would fall into the executive branch as the chief law enforcement agency of the country. But because of the Supreme Court's decision that Congress does have the ability to investigate as long as it pertains to a legislative matter, the congressional subpoena was deemed constitutional by the Supreme Court in two instances. Since Congress can't directly hand down any sort of criminal charge, a warrant is not necessary to have a congressional subpoena, but, as I said, it is limited specifically to a legislative purpose and cannot be used for any other purpose. Now, with this in mind, the banks have not broken any law given the fact that they have complied with Congress in order to turn over these documents. In fact, right now they are working completely within the letter of the law. And Congress, while not having any ability to levy charges of criminal acts or criminal conspiracy against the banks, if they were to sit and hide these documents or hide any of the information that Congress is requesting, Congress can levy a contempt charge against anybody who doesn't cooperate with the subpoena. We are seeing this with William Barr in the Department of Justice right now, where Barr is breaking the law if he does turn over the unredacted Mueller report, and he's also breaking the law if he does not turn over the unredacted Mueller report. Congress does have the internal authority to arrest and detain, and while it wouldn't be carried out by any law enforcement agency or the Department of Justice itself, the Congress would have to have the sergeant at arms make the arrest and enforce the detention until the person who is held in contempt of Congress does comply with Congress. And this is a scary thought for a bank, especially a bank as large as Wells Fargo or TD Bank, because there's a lot of money tied up and a lot of customers' money tied up into these banks. And it would not just affect the tops of these banks. These banks would fall very quickly out of favor with the people of this country if they did decide to deny Congress's request for any of the documents that were requested by the House of Representatives. Now, we all know why this came to the front and the center of the news, and that's because there have been calls to boycott banks like Wells Fargo and TD Bank because they have cooperated with Congress in their subpoena request. And many of the same people who have called for boycotts of Wells Fargo were just defending the bank and saying they were going to open up accounts over in that bank because they were strong advocates of the NRA when David Hogg was calling to boycott these same banks just a few months ago. But if you did want to go and pull your money out of these banks, it's a non-government solution. It's a free market answer to how you feel about the government and the fact that Congress is passing these subpoenas down. But it may be preemptive all the same. With Congress's ability to subpoena not requiring a warrant, as I mentioned before, these banks are just following the law and trying to protect their bottom line and even their customers at this point. One of the things that I kept thinking while I was reading about this and learning what congressional subpoena power was, is the fact that Congress does require a legislation to investigate anything or issue any sort of a subpoena. And that keeps bringing me back to the same point. We've never seen any sort of legislation. any legislation that passed Congress would have to get to the president's desk in order to get signed. So you would think that you would want the guy in the loop and you would want him to know what legislation Congress was pursuing in these investigations. But we haven't heard anything here on the ground, and I'm sure that the president would have tweeted or said something if Congress had suggested the fact that they were going to pass a law that they wanted him to sign. And the other thing that I thought of course, is the idea that the articles of impeachment could be considered a legislation, and now I start to wonder if we are actually going to have a legitimate impeachment investigation, and the president is going to get his day in court in the Senate, where he will most likely be acquitted. Conservative commenter Sean Hannity swore up and down on both of his shows that if Democrats got the House back, that we would see endless investigations continuously until the end of Donald Trump's presidency. And given what we saw this past week, this appears absolutely to have come to pass. But I keep thinking, as I keep hearing the thought that Congress is going to issue another subpoena to another financial institution to get more and more records on the president, that Mueller had no restrictions in his investigation. He was looking through anything and everything that was related to the president. Anybody who's ever talked to the president in Times Square in the past 72 years was subject to the Mueller investigation. So, of course, the first question that you have to ask when you look into something like this is, has this already been investigated through the extensive fine-tooth comb of the Mueller report? And of course, we would have to sit down and read the report to know this for sure. I started this video talking about the fact that being an elected official means waiving your constitutional rights, especially the Fourth and the Fifth Amendments. And congressional subpoena appears almost limitless. Now, as I've mentioned numerous times in the video, Congress does have to be pursuing a legislation to make an investigation. But all in all, if you look at the way that this is structured right now, it does fly in the face of the 4th, 5th, 9th, and even possibly the 14th Amendments. The Supreme Court has ruled on the fact that congressional subpoena power is constitutional at this time, but these were in specified cases. And I keep having to wonder if the Supreme Court is going to have to rule on whether or not an elected official is a citizen of the United States and is subject to the rights that are enumerated in the Constitution, or whether Congress does have the power above and beyond the Constitution so long as it is related to making any sort of a law. Lastly, I look at the fact that the president has refused to turn over his tax returns at this point, and he has cited the fact that he has been under audit since 2015. Therefore, his lawyers have advised him that he should not be turning any of this information over. And I also look at the fact that the Democrats in Congress have been demanding these tax returns since the Donald came down the escalator back in 2015. And I keep wondering the fact that could Trump be withholding this information on purpose? Possibly not at the advisement of his lawyers, but possibly to expose the Democrats and the government at large for the way that they do business. I keep wondering if he's withholding this information to see just how many laws congressional Democrats and even establishment Republicans will break in order to get this information. What do you think about congressional subpoena power, and what do you think about the banks that complied with Congress in order to release these financial records? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter, that is at EdsBlogTwitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel, and remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care.
You're always